The bidding started at $20. That was the number Gregory chose, standing on a small stage in front of 300 people, holding a microphone in one hand and my future in the other. "Who wants this useless wife?" he said, grinning like he'd told the joke of the century. The laughter came fast, rolling through the ballroom like it had been waiting for permission. Someone near the bar raised a paddle just to keep the bit going. I stood there in the blue dress I'd bought for that exact night, and I did not cry. I did not argue. I only looked at him. Then a voice from the back of the room said, $2 million, and everything stopped. I want to tell you how I ended up on that stage, because it didn't happen in one night. It happened over 27 years, one small erasure at a time, until I was so used to being invisible that I almost didn't notice the moment it became official. I'd built that gala myself. Every centerpiece, every seating chart, every call to a caterer who kept getting the head count wrong. I'd done it for 11 years, ever since Gregory's foundation outgrew a backyard dinner. I never asked for credit. Some people work behind the curtain. I'd made peace with being one of them. Gregory arrived 40 minutes late, the way he always did now, kissed my cheek in front of the board, thanked me for pulling it together, then spent the evening taking credit for choices I'd made alone. I used to mind. By last year, I mostly didn't. You'd be surprised what a person gets used to. By dessert, he'd had enough of the good scotch to start in on his usual jokes. I was old-fashioned. I balanced a checkbook by hand. I'd never sent a text longer than 4 words. "She's the least exciting woman in this room," he told the table, loud enough for 3 tables to hear. And I mean that with love. He always added that last part, like it was a receipt that made the insult legitimate. I don't know whose idea the auction was. His business partner Tom did these bachelor auction bits at other events. All in good fun. All for charity. Someone thought it'd be funnier with married couples. Gregory thought it was hilarious. He pulled me up onto the stage they'd built for the band, and for half a second I actually thought he might say something kind. Instead, he took the microphone and turned me into a punchline in front of everyone I'd ever hosted, fed, remembered the birthdays of. I didn't run. I didn't throw my wine in his face, though some small, tired part of me wanted to. I just stood there, spine straight, hands folded, because dignity is the one thing a room full of laughing people can't take from you, unless you hand it to them yourself. Then the room went silent, the way it does when something real interrupts something fake. $2 million. Every head turned. Gregory's hand slid off my shoulder like it had gone cold. I found the voice in the crowd, a tall man in gray, a stranger, already walking toward the stage, unhurried, the room parting around him. He stopped a few feet away and looked at me, the way you look at something you've been searching for a long time. "My name is Daniel Whitmore," he said, and I heard the room inhale, because apparently that name meant something to everyone but me. Gregory recovered fast, hand out, salesman's smile snapping back into place. "Of course we're honored, your generosity to the foundation." "I didn't come for your foundation," Daniel said, and something in his voice made Gregory's hand drop before it was shaken. "I came because I heard your wife would be here." Gregory laughed nervously and asked if we knew each other. "No," I said, because it was true, and because I'd never once given him reason to doubt me in 27 years. Daniel turned to me, his face softening the way a face does after a long drive finally ends. "Mrs. Simmons, this isn't what it looks like. Would you allow me to take you to dinner tomorrow? I have something to tell you, and it doesn't belong in a room like this." I should have said no. Instead, I looked at his face and saw something I hadn't been given in longer than I could remember. Not pity, not tolerant affection, but plain, unembarrassed respect. "Tomorrow evening," I said. The whispers started before we'd even left the stage. In the car, Gregory's knuckles were white on the wheel. "Do you know him?" $2 million, Angela, for a joke. People don't do that. I told him the truth. He didn't believe me. He went quiet the rest of the drive, and once we were home he disappeared into his study instead of coming to bed. What I didn't know that night was that he'd already called his assistant Margaret from the car, asking her to dig into Daniel Whitmore, his business, his marriages, any thread connecting his name to mine. And I didn't know that by morning, what she found would unsettle Gregory far more than an affair ever could. Daniel Whitmore had been quietly searching for a woman named Angela Simmons for years. Daniel chose a small restaurant I'd never heard of, tables spaced for privacy. He stood when I walked in. Almost nobody does that anymore. And for a long moment after we ordered, he just looked at me across the candlelight. "I want to apologize for last night," he finally said. "I've been trying to find you a long time. When I saw what your husband was doing, I couldn't stand by." "You still haven't told me how you know me." He took a slow breath. 30 years ago, you were a young elementary school teacher. Do you remember a rainy afternoon, a teenage girl crying outside the bus station? Something in my chest creaked open. There was a girl, 15, 16, soaked through. I almost didn't stop. I had papers to grade. But she looked so frightened. I bought her dinner, some diner a few blocks away. "Her name was Rachel," Daniel said, his voice catching on it. "Rachel Whitmore, my younger sister. She'd run from our stepfather's house. I was already grown, living across the country. I didn't know how bad it had gotten until it was almost too late." He steadied himself. "And then a stranger sat down next to her, in the rain, and asked if she was hungry." It came back to me now, staying with her long past when I should have gone home. Calling someone I trusted at social services instead of the general hotline. Sitting in a plastic chair at 2 in the morning until someone reliable could take her somewhere safe. Visiting her at the group home. Bringing books. Losing touch eventually, the way life moves forward whether you mean it to or not. She became a lawyer, Daniel said, pride breaking through the grief. Foster care advocacy. She built a national organization. Group homes, legal aid, emergency shelters. She used to say it all started with a diner and a stranger who didn't have to stop, but did. He set an unopened envelope on the table. She died 8 months ago. Cancer. Near the end, she made me promise one thing. Find the woman from the bus station. Tell her she saved my life. I put my hand over my mouth. I hadn't cried through the auction, through the laughter, through my own husband pricing me at $20. I cried now, quietly, over a girl I'd nearly forgotten, and a debt I never knew I was owed. "The $2 million wasn't charity," Daniel said gently. "I didn't do it for your husband's foundation, though I confess, I didn't mind if it embarrassed him. I did it because for 30 years, everyone in your life has decided what you were worth, without ever really looking at you. I wanted a room to finally see the truth of it." He slid the envelope toward me. "It's from Rachel. I haven't read it. It isn't mine to read." Alone in the guest room, I'd taken to sleeping in since the gala. I finally opened it. Her handwriting was small and careful, a lawyer's hand. "Dear Angela, if you're reading this, my brother finally found you. The woman who bought me dinner on the worst night of my life became the reason I believed strangers could still be kind. Everything I built because of 1 hour you probably don't even remember. I hope you'll accept what I'm leaving you not as payment, because you never asked for anything, but as proof that kindness doesn't disappear. It multiplies. It just takes a while to come back around." Attached were legal documents I had to read twice. Rachel hadn't just left me money. She'd left me a seat on her foundation's board, and a controlling share of its direction. Leadership, purpose. A say in where hundreds of thousands of dollars went every year toward shelters and scholarships for kids, like the girl I'd once bought a diner dinner. Downstairs, Gregory was building something too, though far less generous. He hired a private investigator named Foster, convinced, in the way a guilty man is always convinced of other people's guilt, that Daniel and I had a history he simply hadn't found yet. What Foster found instead unsettled Gregory more than any affair could have. Teachers who remembered me keeping granola bars for hungry kids. A widow named Diane, I'd sat with every Tuesday for 2 years after her husband died, back when Gregory was too busy to notice I'd disappeared. 3 former foster children who described a woman who showed up at their school plays because no one else would. A veteran named Harold, whose benefits I'd helped him finally claim. None of it was scandal. It was decades of small, unremarkable kindness that had never once made it to Gregory's dinner table, because I'd never thought it worth mentioning, and he'd never once asked. The report landed on his desk the same week the video went viral. Some guests' phone footage of him grinning. "Let's start the bidding at $20. Now watched 4 million times. Captioned by strangers who weren't kind about it. A late-night host mentioned it. An advocacy account called it casual cruelty dressed in a tuxedo. And that clip alone hit 1 million views by Friday. Sponsors called. 2 developers quietly asked their lawyers to review exit clauses. By the time Gregory came home Friday night, he looked 5 years older. "It's everywhere, Angela. I can't make it stop." Before I could answer, the phone rang. The board wanted an emergency meeting Monday. He told me about it that night in pieces, still too stunned to organize it into a full story. 7 directors sat around the glass-walled table he used to love showing off, and none of them would meet his eyes. It was the oldest of them who finally said it. "This isn't about the joke. Jokes get forgiven. This is about what the joke told everyone about who you actually are when you think no one important is watching." By Wednesday, one hotel group pulled a contract entirely, citing brand alignment. By Thursday, Gregory stopped mentioning numbers to me at all. He came to me with a morning show offer. The 2 of us, set the record straight, tell everyone it was just a joke between us. I looked at him a long moment. "I won't lie for anyone anymore, Gregory. Not even you." He didn't yell. He just sat down at the kitchen table and put his head in his hands. And for the first time in longer than I could remember, I felt something close to pity for him. Not enough to change my answer. I called Daniel that week, not about the interview, but about Rachel's letter, about the strange new weight I didn't yet know how to carry. He didn't push. "Take your time, but if you ever want to see what the foundation actually does, I could take you to one of the shelters." I said yes before I'd fully thought it through. The shelter was a converted apartment building, with cheerful curtains someone had clearly chosen on purpose. That's where I met Lena Brooks, maybe 28. A sleeping 4-year-old against her shoulder, a girl a little older coloring beside her, and the specific exhaustion of someone who'd spent every ounce of herself keeping 2 small people fed and unaware of how close to the edge they really were. Something in her face matched a girl under a bus station awning 30 years ago so precisely I had to steady myself against the doorframe. I sat with her. I didn't ask her story right away. I asked if the children had eaten, walked to the corner store for sandwiches, and let her tell it in her own time. A husband who drank, a shelter with no room, 2 months sleeping in a car. Through the foundation, I arranged 6 months of covered rent, while she finished a certification course she'd started and abandoned twice. Driving home that afternoon, I felt something I hadn't felt in years sitting beside Gregory at any gala he'd built his name on. Useful, not decorative. Gregory noticed before I said a word, noticed I'd stopped waiting for his schedule before making my own. One night, watching me come home late from a foundation meeting, lit up in a way he hadn't seen in years, he said quietly, almost to himself, "You don't need any of this anymore, do you? Me, the company, none of it." I didn't answer right away, because I was still finding out the answer myself. But I could see in his face that some part of him had known this was coming, long before that microphone ever reached his hand. The invitation to Rachel's Foundation Gala arrived with my name in gold lettering, and beneath it, keynote speaker, Angela Simmons. I nearly said no. I'd spent a lifetime useful from the edges of rooms, not the center of them. But I thought of Lena, 6 months into her course, texting me photos with a joy I hadn't heard in her voice the day we met. I thought of Rachel's letter in my dresser drawer. Kindness multiplies. It just takes a while to come back around. I said yes. I dressed alone that night, in the small apartment I'd moved into, 6 weeks after telling Gregory I needed space. A deep green dress, nothing like the blue one from that other ballroom. I did my own hair and checked no one's approval. Daniel met me at the entrance and walked me in, steady and unhurried. "You don't have to say much. Just tell them the truth." That's all Rachel ever wanted. I told the crowd about a rainy afternoon, and a diner booth, and a girl I'd nearly walked past because I had papers to grade. I told them I hadn't thought it remarkable at the time, and that I now believed that was exactly the point. The kindnesses that change lives rarely announce themselves while they're happening. Then the screen behind me lit with faces. A former foster child turned nurse, the veteran Harold, a teacher crying over granola bars, and finally Lena, her daughter beside her. She sat with us. That's all. She just sat with us until it didn't feel impossible anymore. In the dark of the audience, I found Gregory sitting alone near the back, in a seat he must have requested quietly, without expecting to be noticed. He wasn't wearing his camera smile. He was just watching, very still, the way I had once been still on a stage he'd built for me. Afterward, at the coat check, he didn't try to charm his way into the moment. "I watched all of it," he said. 27 years. And I never once asked what you did on your Tuesday afternoons." His voice broke on Tuesday. He was thinking of Diane, of every small absence he'd never questioned because he'd never wondered where I went. "I'm sorry. Not the kind that wants something back. Just sorry." I stood beside someone extraordinary for almost 3 decades and never looked up long enough to see her. I believed him. That was the strangest part, that I could still tell a performance from a genuine reckoning, and this was the latter. "I forgive you, Gregory, but forgiveness isn't the same as going back." He nodded slowly, didn't argue, and let me say goodnight. I walked out into a cool evening that felt, for the first time in longer than I could remember, like the beginning of something that belonged entirely to me. 6 months passed, the way real change usually does. Quietly, in increments too small to notice until you look back and see the distance covered. The foundation opened 2 new shelters. The scholarship program grew from a handful of recipients to 30. Lena finished her certification and started work at a pediatric clinic. She sent me a photo of her name badge with 3 exclamation points, and I kept it taped inside my desk drawer, where I'd once kept granola bars for children I never expected to remember me. Gregory resigned as chairman that spring, not forced out in the end, but chosen. Over coffee, one of the last times we spoke as anything like a married couple, he told me he didn't want to spend the second half of his life as a man who'd only learned decency after losing everything that mattered. We separated with more grace than we'd shown each other in years. No shouting, no dividing assets like weapons, just 2 people finally honest, signing papers and shaking hands like colleagues closing out a long, complicated project. He asked, before I left that office for the last time as his wife, whether we could have been happy if he'd paid attention sooner. I told him I didn't know, and that I'd stopped needing to know. I think that answer surprised him more than anger would have. On a quiet Sunday that autumn, Daniel and I drove to the cemetery where Rachel was buried, a modest stone under an oak just turning gold. He set white lilies at the base and stepped back, and I knelt and rested my hand on the cool stone. "You thought I saved your life," I told her, not caring that Daniel could hear. "But I've been thinking about it for months, and I believe you saved mine right back. I just didn't know it yet." It took 30 years for the debt to come due, and I got the better end of the bargain by far. Daniel put his hand briefly on my shoulder, the way you comfort someone who doesn't need comforting so much as company, and we stood a while longer in the gold light before turning back toward the car. That was when I saw her, a young woman, maybe 19, alone on a bench outside the gates, a duffel bag at her feet, arms wrapped around herself against a wind that wasn't really that cold. The particular stillness of someone trying not to be noticed, and the particular fear of someone who's learned that being noticed rarely goes well. I recognized it instantly. I had seen it once before, 30 years ago, under a bus station awning in the rain, and I'd carried it without realizing, every year since. I didn't hesitate. I walked over and sat down on the far end of the bench, close enough to be present, far enough not to crowd her, and asked the only question that has ever mattered in moments like that one. "Would you like to sit with me for a while?" She looked up, startled, wary, and then, slowly, something in her shoulders loosened, the way a held breath finally lets go. She nodded. And the cycle that started with a stranger and a diner booth 30 years earlier began again, quietly, the way it always had, without an audience, without applause, without anyone keeping score. Sometimes people laugh while they decide what you're worth. They hold up the microphone. They set the price. They wait for the room to agree with them. But life has a way of letting time settle the real account, long after the laughter fades and the room empties out. And when it finally does, you learn the truth of it. Kindness is always worth more than those who mock it could ever afford to pay.